Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, unpack them, and really try to find the most fascinating insights. Today, we're embarking on a deeply personal but also globally significant deep dive. We're looking into the extraordinary life of Malala Yousafzai.
That's right. And our source material today comes from excerpts of the book I Am Malala, the story of the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. And
Hmm.
it's much more than just a standard biography. It really paints this vivid picture of a family, a culture, a whole region actually grappling with huge changes and conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our mission here is to explore Malala's journey, starting from her roots in Pakistan's Swat Valley through that incredibly tumultuous period under Taliban rule, right up to her, remarkable recovery and her unwavering advocacy for education around the world. We're going to try and distill the essential nuggets, the key insights, so you can really understand the forces that shaped her and how her story, how it became such a beacon of hope. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start right at the beginning, Malala's origins. Swat Valley. Beautiful place, but often misunderstood, right? Where do we begin with her identity?
Well, what immediately stands out is just how deeply Malala's identity is interwoven with her Pashtun heritage. It's fundamental. We learned she was actually named after Malai of Maiwand. Now, she was a legendary Afghan heroine back in 1880 who rallied her people, inspired them to victory against the British.
Wow, so that name itself carries weight.
Exactly. It's not just, historical nod. It sets this powerful precedent for bravery, a kind of legacy she would perhaps unknowingly step into.
And the Pashtunwali code, their traditional way of life, that seems so central too.
Oh, absolutely. It's built on principles like incredible hospitality and unwavering honor. They call it Nang. That's paramount. But it's complex. It also carries this deeply rooted concept of revenge. There's a saying, the stone of Pashto does not rust in water, meaning they neither forget nor forgive. It's quite stark.
Yeah. And I found this detail surprising. They rarely say thank you.
Right. Because a good deed, under Pashtunwali, it's sort of expected to be reciprocated eventually, not just, verbally acknowledged on the spot. It tells you a lot about their values.
It really does. How does all this help us understand the bigger picture, the sort of context of the region?
Well, it sheds light on the inherent complexities. Think about this.
Hmm.
The word for cousin, Tarbur, is also the word for enemy.
Really?
Yeah, it points to this long history of internal feuds, rivalries within the community. But paradoxically, they unite fiercely against outsiders. It's this culture of intense loyalty, strong boundaries. It plays a crucial role later on.
And the place itself, Swat. The book paints such a vivid picture. Mingora, the main city, described as crowded, maybe a bit dirty.
Yes, but also this vibrant hub, you know. Known for traditional embroidery, gemstones, and near Malala's home, Gulkata.
Right, which used to be called Butkara.
Exactly, place of the Buddhist statues. It shows this incredibly deep ancient history. There are still remnants, old lion statues, stone umbrellas. It speaks to layers upon layers of history.
So the sense of an enduring past, how does that influence the present, do you think?
Well, that blend of ancient and modern, it's key. Swat's history is surprisingly rich. You have figures like Alexander the Great sweeping through in 327 BC.
Alexander, wow.
Yeah. The local people apparently believed their sacred mountain, Mount Elam, would protect them. But Alexander, he just built a wooden ramp and conquered it. So this history, this mix of belief, resistance, being overcome but enduring, it provides crucial context for understanding of the cultural strength, the resilience that runs right through Malala's own story.
And her family life seems just as foundational. Her parents, they started out really poor, didn't they?
Incredibly poor, living in a basic shack right opposite the school her father co-founded.
Her father, Ziauddin, he comes across as more of a romantic and idealist than a businessman.
Definitely. And he faced just immense challenges setting up the Kushal school. There's that amazing story where he confronts officials trying to bribe him.
Oh, yeah, telling them.
You are not running brothels, you are educating children. I mean, that says everything about his character, his convictions.
Absolutely. His moral compass was just unwavering. Education was sacred to him.
It really was. And what's also striking, especially for that culture, is the role of Malala's mother, Torpikai.
Right. Despite the norms.
Exactly. Despite norms that often limited women's public roles, she was his closest confidant. She was right there, helping whitewash school walls during power cuts, managing the household with real skill. And her father just adored her. It was a dynamic that really stood in stark contrast to how many other men in their culture treated their wives, quite progressive, actually, within their home.
So Malala herself, she basically grew up in the school.
Pretty much. Mimicking teachers, apparently starting classes at a really young age. She was known as a genius girl, always top of her class.
Until her rival arrived.
Yes. Malki Yunor, a new girl who actually provided some competition. It's kind of funny, isn't it? Even a genius girl needs that push.
It does feel like a tiny personal test run for the much bigger challenges she'd face later. You see how deeply education was just part of her identity right from day one. Okay, so as the story moves forward, these wider political currents in Pakistan, they start to directly impact life in Swat. Things begin to shift.
They really do. And you have to understand, Pakistan's history is, well, tragically marked by this cycle of military coups, shifting powers. You had General Zia-ul-Haq seizing power, hanging an elected prime minister. Later, General Pervez Musharraf dramatically stopping a prime minister's plane to take control. It created this deep climate of instability, a lack of trust in government.
Right, a constant sense of uncertainty.
Exactly. And this flux, it always leaves a vacuum that other forces can exploit.
And the book also touches on the religious landscape, which sounds incredibly complex.
It is. Very diverse interpretations of Islam in Pakistan. You have the conservative Deobandi, known for stricter interpretations, then the more Arab-influenced Salafists, advocating for a return to what they see as the earliest forms of Islam.
Just lots of different viewpoints.
Lots. And this complex religious environment, alongside the political instability, it becomes fertile ground for the rise of groups like the Taliban. Plus, you have the challenges faced by minority communities, too.
And then global events start to have a direct impact. 9/11.
Right, which initially felt distant to a young Malala, understandably. But very quickly, the war on terror arrived right in their valley. Al-Qaeda militants fleeing Afghanistan found safe haven in the federally administered tribal areas FATA. And they specifically exploited that Pashtun code of hospitality, the Pashtunwali, which obliges you to protect anyone seeking refuge.
Even militants.
Even militants, and put people in an impossible position.
And then, on top of all that, the 2005 earthquake. Devastating.
Absolutely devastating. And it further destabilized everything. While foreign aid agencies, often struggled with logistics, getting into remote areas.
Militant groups stepped in.
Precisely. Groups like the TNSM, Tehreek-e-Nifazi Sharia-e-Mohammadi, and Jamaat-ul-Dawa, which is the welfare wing of Lashkar-e-Taiba. They moved in fast. They provided swift, well-equipped aid, set up field hospitals. And this wasn't just charity. It allowed them to embed deeply within communities, gain huge influence, and a kind of moral authority.
That makes sense. They were seen as effective when maybe the government wasn't.
Exactly. And this whole crisis created the perfect environment for the Taliban, especially under Maulana Fazlullah to Radio Mullah, to really gain ground.
The Radio Mullah. He used radio quite effectively, didn't he?
Incredibly effectively. He essentially weaponized the radio. His sermons spread their ideology, banning things like music, Bollywood shows, even simple board games like Karam.
Wow, Karam too.
Yeah. It wasn't just about rules. It was about controlling the public mood, the psyche, especially telling women to wear burqas, creating what Malala called a chilling sense of being little dolls to control.
And things escalated after the Red Mosque siege in Islamabad.
Yes, that was July 2007. After that, Fazlullah openly declared war on the Pakistani government. And that led to this terrifying spike in violence, suicide bombings becoming almost commonplace.
Such a dark time. And then there was that brief hope with Benazir Bhutto's return.
A brief flickering hope. Her return was huge. But then her assassination. It just felt like, as Malala put it, the country was running out of hope.
And some extremists actually tried to justify her killing using religion.
Yeah, twisting interpretations of Islam to suit their agenda. It just deepened the despair, the sense of vulnerability across the country, and especially in places like Swat.
So, with all this escalating extremism, this rising tide of fear, what did it mean for Malala and her family? This is when her own voice starts to emerge, right?
It is, and it meant living under constant threat, constant peril. But it also brought out this remarkable courage, particularly in Malala's father, Ziauddin. He had this belief, he'd say, at night our fear is strong, Johnny. Johnny is like dear one. But in the morning, in the light, we find our courage again.
That's powerful.
It really is. And that conviction pushed him. Yeah. He became the spokesperson for the Kwame Jirga.
That's the traditional council of elders.
Exactly. A body with significant local authority. And he used that platform to directly challenge Fazlullah. He organized peace marches, and incredibly, girls like Malala spoke out publicly against the militancy.
Young girls speaking out, that must have been incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. They started giving interviews on ATV Khyber, the only private Pashto TV channel at the time. Talk about classmates dropping out of school because of the threats.
And the risk increased as they got older.
Yes, because of puberty and the cultural sensitivities around Turda, the practice of veiling and seclusion for women. It made them more visible, more vulnerable targets. Meanwhile, the Taliban, through their spokesman, Muslim Khan, were just relentlessly spreading disinformation about girls' schools, which led to hundreds being blown up, just destroyed.
Hundreds. It's hard to comprehend. How did they keep going?
Well, Malala's father was just resolute. He famously insisted they'd keep educating children till the last room, the last teacher, and the last student was alive. Incredible determination.
And Malala started her blog around this time.
Yes, under the pseudonym Gul Makai for BBC Urdu. And these weren't just news reports, they were deeply personal, sharing her feelings, the sheer terror of daily life. She even described how the burqa, which maybe once seemed fun for dressing up as a child, became this suffocating burden, made it hard to even walk properly. It shows how that control seeped into every aspect of life.
Yeah. And the situation just kept getting worse. Class size is shrinking.
Drastically. From, say, 27 girls in her class down to just 10. Fear was driving families away or forcing them to keep daughters home.
But her father wouldn't leave.
No. He felt this deep loyalty. Swat has given us so much, he said. In these tough days, we must be strong for our valley. But despite his strength, eventually, the Taliban did force the schools to close. And Malala, just 11 years old, felt like she had lost everything. That loss, for a child who lived for school, it's profound.
It really is. But there was that brief moment when the ban was lifted slightly.
Yes, a very brief flicker. There was widespread outrage over a video showing a woman being publicly flogged. The backlash was so strong that Fazlullah temporarily lifted the ban, but only for girls up to age 10.
And Malala was 11.
She was 11. So she strategically pretended to be younger just so she could attend a secret school they set up.
A secret school? That's like something out of a movie.
It was pure defiance, a silent protest, as she called it. Students hiding books under their shawls, terrified of being discovered, knowing the risks floggings or worse.
And even with thousands of army troops supposedly there.
Right, 12,000 troops deployed, but still, a staggering 70% of SWAT remained effectively under Taliban control. The army's presence didn't translate into safety for ordinary people.
And hopes for peace deals just kept collapsing.
It'd surface briefly, then vanish. Like one after the murder of Musa Khan Kill, a local leader. Hope was just constantly extinguished. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, the 2010 floods hit. Utter devastation.
Adding another layer of misery.
Exactly. It plunged the region deeper into despair, made people even more vulnerable, and really stoked fears that the Taliban, maybe driven out briefly by the army, would just return. It felt like this relentless cycle of hardship.
And through all this, the personal pressure on Malala's father must have been immense.
Unbearable, really.
Mm.
He started receiving anonymous death threats, especially after he publicly denounced Fazlullah, calling him the chief of all devils.
Wow. That took guts.
Incredible guts. And then his friend, Zahid Khan, another member of the Jirga, was shot. A clear warning.
Did he take security after that?
No. Remarkably, he refused police security, his reasoning, at least I'll be killed alone. That kind of stark individual courage against just overwhelming odds, it really defines this period.
And that unwavering courage, that refusal to be silenced, ultimately leads us to that terrible day, October 9th, 2012, the day Malala was shot. She remembers thinking about exams, revision, and then sounds like chickens being slaughtered. What exactly happened? How close did she come?
It was a brutal, targeted attack on her school bus. A Taliban gunman boarded and asked, "Who is Malala?" Then he fired. Her father, hearing the news, initially thought maybe, a jealous lover or some personal dispute, tragically common things. But he soon learned the horrifying truth. The bullet entered near her left eyebrow, traveled down, and lodged near her left shoulder blade. Initial scans they did in SWAT, they were incomplete. It was only later they realized.
How bad it was.
Just how critical. A later scan showed the bullet had passed very close to the brain. Bone fragments had actually entered and damaged the brain membrane. Her survival, honestly, it was miraculous.
And the Taliban didn't hesitate to claim responsibility.
No, they quickly claimed it. And their justification was chilling. Not directly for her education advocacy, they said, but for, quote, maligning their efforts to establish the Islamic system.
So for speaking out against them.
Essentially, yes, for challenging their narrative, their control. They even sent her a letter after her recovery, offering forgiveness if she came back, wore a burqa, and went to a religious school, a madrasa.
Unbelievable. The audacity.
It really highlights the ideological battle she was caught in. They wanted to control her story even after trying to end it.
Her survival, you said, was miraculous. Who helped her pull through initially?
A lot depended on immediate skilled medical help. Colonel Junaid and Dr. Mumtaz, two Pakistani army doctors, were crucial. They performed a complex 5-hour operation to remove part of her skull to relieve swelling and dealt with the bullet's path. But Pakistan, despite their efforts, just didn't have the kind of long-term, specialized rehabilitation facilities she was going to need. So the critical decision was made to move her overseas.
Right, and that transfer itself became politically sensitive.
It did. General Kayani, the army chief then, was apparently very concerned about ongoing tensions with the U.S. There had been incidents like the Raymond Davis affair, the bin Laden raid.
Okay.
So he insisted that Americans should not be involved in her transfer.
Cool.
Ultimately, she was flown on a luxurious plane provided by the UAE to Birmingham, England, to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
And what was it like for her waking up there, so far from home after such trauma?
It's just incredibly poignant to read about. Her awakening was filled with profound confusion. She couldn't speak or write properly at first. Her very first words, which she managed to spell out painstakingly on an alphabet board, were father and country.
Wow.
She didn't even recognize her own name initially. She writes about wondering quietly, was I still Malala?
It just underscores how deeply her identity was tied to her family, her homeland, and, well, her purpose.
And the reunion with her family when they finally arrived.
After 16 agonizing days, it was incredibly emotional. She hadn't cried, apparently, not even through painful injections and procedures, but finally seeing her parents and brothers, she just wept uncontrollably.
Understandable. And even then, her focus.
Right back to education. Almost immediately, she asked her father to bring her school bag from Pakistan, or, if not, to buy her new books. Why? Because her board exams were coming up in March.
Still thinking about exams after everything she'd been through. That's just pure Malala. It absolutely encapsulates her spirit. But we have to remember the immense sacrifices this meant for her family. Her father, he wrestled with this profound guilt. Worried people blamed him for pushing her, for putting her in danger. Worried that her smile, changed by the injury, would forever remind him of the shooting.
That's heavy.
Incredibly heavy. And their new life in Birmingham. It was safe, yes, but felt like a kind of luxury house arrest, she describes it, behind an electric gate. So different from their bustling, community-filled home in Mingora, it felt empty to them. Her father especially mourned the school he had poured his life into building back in Swat, which ironically was now thriving, 1,100 pupils, 70 teachers all left behind, a huge personal cost.
Yeah, a world away. Yet despite all that hardship, the displacement, the trauma, Malala just continued her advocacy, didn't she?
She did, almost immediately. First receiving Pakistan's first ever National Peace Prize while still recovering, and later being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming the youngest nominee ever at the time.
And she was very clear about how she wanted to be known.
Absolutely. She famously stated, I don't want to be known as the girl who was shot by the Taliban. I want to be known as the girl who fought for education.
That reframing is so powerful.
It really is. And her pilgrimage to Mecca, that seemed to really solidify her purpose. She described crying while praying there, praying for peace in Pakistan, and praying specifically for girls' education worldwide. Her personal trauma fueled a global mission.
It shows how one voice, if it's determined enough, if it refuses to be silenced, can truly become a global movement.
It does. And I think what her story ultimately highlights is that, yeah, she's grateful for the global recognition, the awards, but she sees them mainly as reinforcing just how much work still needs to be done.
Yeah.
Her journey is just this incredible testament to the power of an individual voice, but also, crucially, a voice supported by a family that, in her words, respected my freedom of thought and expression. All of this against what seemed like absolutely insurmountable odds.
So when we unpack all of this, what does Malala's story really mean for us today? It's rooted in these ancient Pashtun traditions, unfolds against this backdrop of huge geopolitical turmoil. What's the takeaway? For me, it shows the profound vulnerability of education in so many places, but also, simultaneously, its incredible resilient power.
I agree. And it really compels us, I think, to consider that simple act, a child picking up a book, and how in some places that very act is revolutionary. It's met with violence. It's a stark reminder that the global fight for universal access to education, especially for girls, is far, far from over. And that courage, it's often found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, persistent actions of individuals. And that can inspire movements worldwide.
So, listening to this, what stands out most to you from Malala's deep dive? How does her journey maybe challenge your own perceptions about courage, about culture, about that fundamental right to learn? We'll leave you with this thought to mull over. If one girl's voice, amplified by circumstance but rooted in conviction, can echo around the world and inspire real change, just imagine what could happen if every voice was allowed the freedom to learn and the freedom to speak.